Hey, and welcome to Be the Bridge. I'm your host, Brian Peyton Joyner. From the time I was 11, I tried to pray away the gay. But my senior year in college, I realized I could pray and be gay. Each week, I'll share my experiences and chat with others as we build a bridge between the LGBT community and people of faith. Thanks for joining, and let the construction begin. Hello, fellow bridge builders. Thank you all for joining me today for this episode of Be the Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Brian Peyton Joyner, author of the novel The Wisdom of Stones. The novel's about Ben, a college senior who promised God and his Meemaw he'd be a Southern Baptist preacher, but he can't pray away the gay. My guest is someone who is a pastor at the First Presbyterian Church in Bordentown, New Jersey. He's the author of a book that was just recently published called Free, Clean, and Loved, a gay pastor's first year in sermons. And he's a writer whose works appeared in Patheos, HuffPost, and Religion Dispatches. William, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here.
So, William, I ask everyone the same question. Where are you from? Where were you born and raised?
Well, so I was born in Germany, actually, but I didn't stay there for very long. My dad was a professor of theology during my childhood, up until I was about 18. And so the year that I was born, he was studying theology over in Münster, Germany.
Wow.
But I think 6 or 8 weeks after I was born, he and my mom moved, and they settled in North Texas, a little town called Sherman, Texas, about an hour north of Dallas, for him to take a teaching job. So I grew up in Texas.
Okay. And where did he teach?
Boston College. It's a Presbyterian liberal arts school. He was there from 1990 until about 2008.
So did you go to a Presbyterian church when you were a kid?
Funny you should ask that. We did not. My religious upbringing was a bit unconventional, given both my mom and dad were Presbyterians, kind of expected to be
right
in a Presbyterian church to raise their family there. But they went to the different Presbyterian churches in Sherman, all of which were good churches. I think there were 3 of them.
Right.
But they didn't feel quite at home there. At least they didn't feel called there.
Okay.
And so what ended up happening was maybe 6 months or so after my parents moved to Sherman, my dad met a woman named Annabelle Wilson, who was a cleaning woman, a janitor in his office building at the college.
Right.
Annabelle's Black. She was about 60 at the time. And once she learned that my dad taught Christian theology, she got all excited because she was a Christian, a person of faith. She would chat with him, and they would chat together kind of late at night while she was cleaning, while my dad was working on lectures for the next day, sort of thing.
Right.
And she would always end those conversations and say, "Steve, before you die, you have to come and hear my pastor preach."
Wow.
And she said that regularly, over the course of several more months. And eventually my dad said, "Okay, well, Annabelle, let's set a date. How about this Sunday? Carrie and I, my wife and I, go and visit your church." Now, that was the first time my dad or my mom had been in a predominantly Black social space, religious space. They were the only white people there. They participated in worship, drove home from church in silence, and as they tell the story, right, looked at each other as they got home, parked the car, and then just burst into tears, knowing that this is where God had called them.
Wow.
So I was a bit under 1 year old then when that happened, and we've been members of that church ever since then. That's 27 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And actually, and to make it even weirder, you didn't think the story could get any weirder, right? For the last, 4 or 5 years or so now, my dad's actually been serving as the pastor of the church.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And there are some more white people around. Oh, and I should say the name, right? This is me telling my story and me trying to do honor to the places and the communities from which I come. So I do want to mention the name of the church, Greater New Hope Missionary Baptist Church in Sherman, Texas, which was my primary religious influence early on in life and remains with me in my heart everywhere I go, and with everything I do even now.
Wow. So that pastor that your parents heard for the first time, did he stay with that church for a while? Did you actually grow up with him as the pastor?
So I actually didn't grow up with him. He left pretty shortly after we got there, as a matter of fact. But the next preacher they brought in, he was around for almost all of my childhood.
Okay.
And he was pretty good too.
So what was your first memory of that church?
One of the earliest ones has to be just after Sunday school, before the worship service each week. Everyone would stand up and sing the first verse of Blessed Assurance together before going into worship. And so that must have been one of the first songs I learned. Yeah, it sticks with me even now. Annabelle remained in that church. Some of my other earlier memories do involve her. I mean, she remained in that church until she died just a few years ago.
Right, wow. So what was the service like at that church? Like, you would go for Sunday school at like 9 o'clock or?
Yeah, I think Sunday school started at 9:30. 9:30 to 10:30 was the Sunday school hour. There was half an hour then of donut time and fellowship time. And then the worship service started at 11. When I was growing up, it was normally a 2-hour worship service, certainly not, and sometimes 2.5, sometimes a bit less than 2, but a solid 2 hours is what we're used to, right? And it's a Black church tradition, and so there's
great singing,
there's good music, and there's a sort of call and response vibe throughout much of it, right? It's not just the person at front who's talking; it's all of us who are participating and who are being vocal and taking part.
Right. Wow. So, what was your parents' theology? How would you label it in terms of conservative, liberal, progressive? And then how did that compare to the church doctrine?
Yeah, good question. So, well, my dad studied theology, right? So he's, to this day, he's read much more on the subject than I have.
Right.
Right. I think he would identify as somewhere in the middle, right? Something of a moderate.
Okay.
I think has some theological and religious sensibilities that people might call conservative, and then he has other sensibilities that people might call liberal.
Okay. Well, I think that's helpful, though, that it sort of it defies then an easy label, because that suggests that it's something where he's really thought and considered all of these issues and not just sort of said, well, this is sort of the conservative stance and I'm going to agree with everything they say on that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to reject all the conservative stuff and I'm going to sort of side with the progressive side or liberal side. So to me, that speaks a lot about his character and about his kind of discipline. Yeah,
and I would echo that. Neither of my parents are kind of party line sort of people, or at least not unthinkingly so. They are both good thinkers and right, are empathetic people. And so they think long and hard before affirming whatever it is that, the people in power are telling us to think or to do.
Right.
Now, that said, the community in which I grew up, not the church community, right? Just the general area and then some of the social circles that my family ran in,
right,
I would say was a bit more party line conservative.
Right.
We spent a lot of time around very socially conservative people and politically and theologically conservative as well growing up. And so, my parents, I think, were on the right side of things, or at least, had themselves a good degree of openness and flexibility and compassion and critical thinking going on. That only went so far, given kind of the more closed-minded, more, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, right.
This kind of water we were swimming in as a family. And so my parents did their best, I think, to keep us from being uncritically conservative or uncompassionately conservative.
Right.
But I'm not sure how well it worked.
Okay. When I grew up, I went to a Southern Baptist church, mm-hmm. and the preacher would often preach about Sodom and Gomorrah, about gays, about sexual immorality, a message I heard all the time, and it really made me grow up fearing hell and thinking I was damned. And in that church, what was the message that you heard on a weekly basis? Did you hear messages that were condemning of the LGBTQIA plus community?
I don't know. I can't recall specifically whether or not I heard any sermons directly about gay people, or probably homosexuals, as they would have been called then.
Sodomites, catamites.
Exactly.
Yeah. My pastor didn't hold any punches, so homosexuals was a polite term.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't remember that. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened and I blocked it out, or I just don't remember. I do remember vividly, later on, by the time I got to high school, I made my way into a predominantly white evangelical youth group in church. And I was attending that church at the same time that I was attending the Black Baptist church in which I was raised.
Okay.
And in that church, I do vividly remember hearing explicitly anti-gay sermons and messages from leadership and from the laity alike. But when it comes to the church that I grew up in, it might have just been a more subtle and more implicit anti-gay message that I inherited. I did inherit that, but I'm not sure it was so much because they were trying to give that message. It might have had a bit more to do with just that was the general cultural milieu that we were in. And I needed something, if I was not going to believe that, I would need some sort of message to counter that. Does that make sense? And the church certainly didn't give me anything like a pro-gay message from the pulpit.
Right. When did you first have attractions towards other guys? Do you remember?
I guess it depends on how we define attraction. I could go with age 5, right? Aladdin was certainly kind of up my alley.
Yeah.
And I could also go with age, 13. I've got some of my older sister's male friends were, up my alley as well. But really, if we're talking about kind of the first time I openly acknowledged to myself, this is a man that I'm attracted to. I am attracted to this boy, this man. That didn't come actually until I was 20.
Wow.
And maybe I can say a bit more about why that was. But I'll start by telling that story, right? I was actually at a liberal arts evangelical college that I attended, Wheaton College outside of Chicago.
Yes. Now, for listeners that may not be fully familiar with Wheaton, maybe you can give just a little bit of the background on Wheaton and the fact that this is one of the most conservative colleges in the country, right?
Yeah, I do think that there are schools like Liberty University and maybe some others that really do.
Bob Jones, yeah.
Yeah. Those schools fall into what I would say just a different category of conservative.
Wheaton is a top liberal arts school. Your degree there is good anywhere. I would question that about some of these other schools. But it is sort of known for being a little more conservative.
It's true.
Having a little bit more code of conduct and for students
and
things.
Yeah, no, it's known for being something of a flagship evangelical college. The administration, right, the faculty is one thing, the student body is one thing.
Right.
The administration, I think, has proven itself to be, just by its public decision-making, pretty hardline conservative.
Right.
The administration can look quite a lot like the administrations at, like, say, Bob Jones or Liberty or whatnot.
Okay, so you're at
so that's where
Wheaton
I am.
College.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm in a class on systematic theology, and
okay.
I'm sitting in the front row of class as I do. So I was sitting next to a guy. Let's call him John. And John was on the soccer team. He and I didn't really cross paths very often before this class period, but we sat next to each other throughout the semester. And I remember one day, maybe a month or two into the class, John and I were talking, as we often did, just for a minute or two before class started, facing each other, chatting. The professor walks in, the professor starts to speak, and I start to turn away from John and towards the professor, kind of rotate in my desk chair. As I'm rotating, I realize, gosh, I really wish that class wasn't starting right now. I really wish that John and I could talk more. And as I realized that, it struck me, oh my God, I'm attracted to John. That's why I don't want to stop talking to John. Now, at this point, at age 20, mind you, I had been about 13 years old, I guess. So 7 years prior to that was when I discovered pornography on the computer, and when my parents discovered me discovering pornography on the computer. So the fact that I was physically attracted to male sexual bodies, that wasn't news to me.
Right.
But over the course of, the previous 7 years, by the time this moment with John occurred, I had convinced myself that, well, no, there's no romantic attraction going on here. There's just something purely physical, purely sexual, and right, given where I was at Wheaton College, right, sexual equals sinful.
Right.
So there's something sinful in me that wants this. But really, at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to come out of that. The Spirit's going to lead me away from that temptation, from that same-sex attraction. And surely my romantic attraction to women will kind of materialize at some point along the way. This moment with John really caught me off guard, because it was the first time I was faced without any recourse, without any excuse. I couldn't get out of it. I was totally confronted with this. No, I'm attracted to this man. And it's not this sort of, I want to see you naked. It's not this sort of, I want to see you pixelated on my screen. It's that, no, I want to talk to you because I'm attracted to you.
People don't understand, if you're straight, your physical attractions have always aligned with your received views on what's an acceptable relationship. But if you're gay and in the conservative Christian community, you're diagnosed with same-sex attractions. You're taught to compartmentalize these physical attractions as separate and distinct from the real affection and love you'll have for someone of the opposite sex. The message we get from our church and from pastors and from counselors is, these are sinful sexual lusts. The real connection and the biblical connection and the Christian connection that you'll have is going to be with a woman. I didn't have that. I just always felt like something was missing. And it wasn't just the sexual piece. It was also that emotional connection wasn't the same. And I just feel like that's something people don't truly understand. So it's interesting that in that moment you became aware of it.
Yeah, I counted a gift of grace, right, that the Spirit finally broke through. And what the Spirit was breaking through, right, was at that point 7 years of the authorities in my life, right, telling me that, no, it's actually preferable for you to be struggling with lust, to be quote unquote struggling with lust than to be authentically longing for intimacy, for a healthy intimacy with men. We'd rather you be just looking at porn and thinking of yourself as a lusty sinner.
Wow. So that was the message from your parents when they found you on the internet at 13 years old?
No. The message from my parents was, we love you. They made that quite clear. And we think you need some help. So it got pathologized, but I also got loved. No, that message came from youth group, I'd say, in the years that followed. Youth group, not at the Black Baptist Church, mind you, but a white evangelical church.
So what was the help that your parents procured for you after they found you looking at this porn? Did you go to a therapist or?
No, thankfully not. No, they talked about getting me help, but then it never really happened. They also talked about, talking more about sex and kind of talking through pornography, these sorts of things. And that didn't really happen either. And I attribute that kind of to again, we were in a more socially conservative environment. And sex is still taboo. Conversations, even with family members about sex, is very taboo. So it just kind of fizzled out. And they did their best. I think they were trying to reach out, trying to get the ball rolling, and to maybe kind of destigmatize some of this, even just if only because they thought it was a problem that needed fixing. But that didn't really happen. It never got fixed.
Right. So during that time period from 13 to 20, did you still occasionally look at porn, and did you have sort of these feelings still for guys, but you were just compartmentalizing them and saying, well, this is lust and I'm going to have an attraction towards women? Did you date women?
Yeah, no, all of what you said, I would agree with. That was my experience. I didn't date women at all. I've never dated a woman. I came pretty close in college, dear friend of mine. But no, I didn't date anyone until I got to seminary, which is when I had decided to be publicly out for the first time.
So let's finish the story with John. Did anything come of this first attraction?
Well, if by anything come of it, you mean did John and I ever talk about it? The answer is no.
Okay.
But what happened, right? So this is in my theology class. The class ended, and I had scheduled right after that, immediately after that class session, a meeting with my mentor. I was an RA at Wheaton that year. And right at a college like Wheaton, the RA role is very much a ministerial role, right? Like we're a community of faith in addition to an educational community. So I'm seeing myself and being seen as a minister to these 30 freshmen, 20 sophomores living on my floor this year.
Right.
And I've got my weekly meeting with my mentor happening literally right after I have this moment where I'm realizing for the first time that, God, I'm actually like gay. And so I'm walking over. I remember walking from my theology classroom to the place where I was meeting my mentor and thinking, am I going to talk with her about this?
Right.
And I decided to mention, hey, here's this experience I had. I didn't go into any of these conclusions of like, and I think I'm going to start identifying as gay at some point. Didn't do anything like that. It was simply, here's this moment. Here's what happened. Here's how I was feeling.
All right.
I just want to share that with someone.
Now, your mentor, what was the age gap between you two? Was she just an older student? Was this a professor or anything, or what was it?
She was a master's student.
Okay.
She was maybe 5 to 10 years older than me.
Okay. So she was in a Master's of Divinity program?
A Master's of Counseling.
Okay.
And to her credit, right, she heard me and she didn't judge me.
Wow.
I didn't feel judged, at least.
Right. Wow.
And she said, thank you for telling me. That takes a lot of courage to say. She told me too, right, that she wasn't going to try to fix this. She wasn't going to try to problem solve, or she certainly wasn't going to disclose it to anyone. And in fact, she intimated at some point, I forget whether it was during this conversation or a later conversation, she intimated that she might not think quite the same way that our college thinks about this issue.
Oh.
She didn't go into depth
into
that.
But I think that's enough. That's sort of, people don't really appreciate it. Coded language. And people say, well, that's not exactly what was said. But, it's coded language is very powerful. Mm-hmm. It sounds like that's just giving you a clear direction on that.
Yeah, it really was a breath of fresh air for me. And it was a signal, right? Subtle signal. A signal nonetheless that she was going to be a safe person.
Right.
And she was. And really, just thinking about my time at Wheaton, a lot of it was hard. A lot of it, there were a lot of unsafe people and unsafe places and unsafe systems at work there for me as a closeted queer kid. But at the same time, there were safe people and I found them. And there were safe places and I found them. And Wheaton really gave me the tools I needed and the resources I needed to come out as gay by the time I was leaving.
Wow. So William, at this point, had you decided that you wanted to be a pastor?
I'd been thinking about pastoral ministry from, maybe age 12 or 13 on. So it's been on my mind for,
Right.
for a long time.
So what was your major when you were there at Wheaton initially?
So my major was in communication. My minor was in biblical and theological studies.
Okay.
Spent a lot of time in both of those departments.
Okay.
Yeah, and at Wheaton, I fell in love with studying the Bible. I fell in love with reading theology, and I fell in love with ministry. And it was a place, a time when I felt like my giftedness for ministry was being honed and affirmed.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I left Wheaton knowing that I wanted to go to seminary, but not knowing that I wanted to be a pastor. I knew I wanted to keep studying the Bible, wanted to keep studying theology, and I knew that whatever I was going to do in life, I wanted to be able to call it ministry. I wanted it to be something that felt like meaningful, spiritual, broadly defined, spiritual work. But I wasn't sure at that point whether or not the pastorate was going to be it for me.
So did you go right from college then to seminary?
I didn't. No, I actually lived for a year in the country of Jordan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I lived at Jordan and worked at a school for deaf and deafblind children, boarding school for deaf and deafblind children. And actually, this time in my life is very much related to my coming out. So a big part of my job while I was living in Jordan was working one-on-one with a deafblind child, a 13-year-old boy named Hazem.
So he was deaf and blind.
He was deaf and blind.
Sort of Helen Keller.
Exactly. Yeah. Similar to Helen Keller, right? When it comes to communicating with this child or with people in general who are deafblind, you need sign language and you need tactile sign language. Or in other words, you need sign language that you're feeling and touching, right? You're holding hands, you're feeling each other's bodies. It's an immensely, deeply, right, embodied way of communicating. And at this point, right, so I'm 22 or so when I'm living in Jordan, 21, 22. And at that point, I had already done kind of the biblical research, the theological research that I felt like I needed to do in order to be okay with coming out as gay. I mean, I was basically affirming, I guess, the term that most people would use by the time I left Wheaton, by the time I started living in Jordan. But as I would guess you can understand, there's some lingering internalized homophobia that often keeps us from embracing ourselves as fully as we might want to.
Right.
So for me, right, I knew the answers in terms of faith, in terms of my own life. It's like, I know this is what I think, and yet there's still some inner hesitancy. There are still some psychological, emotional, whatever roadblocks that are keeping me from embracing this part of who I am. Until, that is, I started working with this deafblind boy. What I realized for me over the course of my year, working with him, not doing all this heady work, right, of writing or speaking or studying, right, but doing this. What matters is, right, that Hazem can feel my body, my hands, my arms, my chest, my legs, and that I'm feeling his. And this is what it means for us to be in relationship. This is what it means for us to love each other, right? Our love and God's love at work through us. It's all about the body. And for me, right, as someone who grew up in a culture, in cultural spaces that were so strongly anti-body, right, where I learned to think of my body as bad, my bodily desires as bad, right? As Hazem and I worked together, I just felt inside of me, right, this knowledge of the goodness of my body settle and take root in a completely new way. And it was like, how could this body be bad, right? How could what I feel this body telling me, how I feel this body leading me, how could it be bad when, right, this body is ministry with Hazem. This body is the love of God with Hazem. It was a profoundly meaningful experience for me, not in terms of, right, thinking about things differently. Like I said, I kind of already come to that place, that affirming place, but just in terms of this inner knowledge, right, this inner assurance. I left Jordan, started seminary, knowing that, okay, I'm ready to publicly identify as gay, largely because of Hazem.
Right. So when did you tell your parents that you had decided to publicly come out?
Well, once I was dating.
Okay, so not at that moment.
So we had conversations about the possibility, or at least I thought we were having conversations about the possibility of us, right? These were kind of veiled, subtle conversations, right? And I thought I was saying things that they didn't realize I was saying.
That's my normal conversation with my husband, I think. So I can fully relate to that. I always think I've told him stuff and he says I didn't tell him, but I thought I did. So I can understand what you're saying. Go ahead.
Well, when it became kind of plainly and maybe painfully apparent to my parents was when I told them, this is like a month or two into my time at seminary, that I'd started dating this fellow seminarian. And that was for them kind of the bombshell that like, oh, this is actually happening now.
Wow. So let's talk about how you met this guy at seminary, because it was a fascinating story. And I heard you tell it at the workshop that you did at the Q Christian Fellowship Conference last month in Denver. Mm-hmm. And so I really loved the story. So can you tell us in detail sort of your first day of seminary? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So we have this orientation week at seminary, like we do at most schools, I guess, like most schools have. I don't even remember what the orientation event was. It was the very first one. There was some like outside picnic or something happening. And I met within maybe 2 hours of being at this event, being at seminary, met this boy. And I thought he was cute and he thought I was cute. And I learned pretty quickly, right, that he was gay. And I think a week or so later, he was a football player. He had been a football player in high school. And so he was getting a flag football team going because our seminary has flag football. And so he asked me if I wanted to be on his flag football team. And I said, yes.
Would you have done that if he hadn't asked you? Is this something that would normally be your sport?
No, volleyball is kind of the only sport that I can't resist.
Okay.
Sort of football is pretty easily resisted for me. Yeah. But a cute boy, I like asking me to football team. That's not as easily resisted. So yeah, I've signed up, and along with half a dozen or so of very straight boys who have also signed up. And right, this is all in the first handful of days of seminary, right? So no one knows very much about anyone. And within a week or two, right, Matthew, my first boyfriend, who's the captain of this flag football team, he and I are dating a bit over a week after we meet. And we've got this flag football team going on, and all of a sudden all these straight dudes have their, flag football team captain who's gay and dating their player who's gay. And half these people had never met anyone gay before coming to seminary anyways, right? So it was just an interesting and fun, actually very good experience.
So what seminary did you go to?
Princeton Seminary in New Jersey.
Is that a denominational seminary or it's...
It is. So it's technically affiliated with the Presbyterian Church, the PCUSA. There's a lot of denominational diversity within the student body. So there are people from all sorts of Christian traditions coming and studying there.
So I know that PCUSA is the sort of liberal branch of Presbyterians, and then you have the other wing that's not affirming.
Yeah. The PCUSA is the only Presbyterian tradition in which presbyteries can approve gay people to be married, same-sex relationships to be validated, and for LGBTQ plus people to be ordained. It is the case, I do kind of want to add a little qualifying note, it is the case that there are plenty of conservative individuals and congregations within even the PCUSA. So it's not a sort of monolithically liberal institution, but it does leave room for these more socially liberal positions, whereas other Presbyterian denominations have an absolutely closed door when it comes to those.
Right. Okay. And so your fellow seminarians, did anyone try to confront you with clobber verses or challenge you for being out and gay?
Yeah, definitely not in any explicit sort of way like that, right? At Princeton, this is one of the things that I appreciate most about the school. At Princeton, the institutional culture definitely leans towards affirming. Right? There are plenty of people, including pretty powerful people at the institution, who are not affirming, right? But the culture definitely leans towards welcoming LGBTQ plus people, not just into the church, but into ministry. And so, whereas at other schools, right, like the pressure is kind of on the affirming people or the LGBTQ people to be quiet.
Right. Okay.
It's the exact opposite at Princeton, right? I think that for the most part, those who are not affirming feel a general social pressure like, okay, I shouldn't be pointing my finger at anyone in class because that's not the way we do things here generally. Right.
Your fellow seminarians, though, had never really maybe met gay people for the first time. Then their flag football quarterback's gay and his boyfriend's on the team.
Yeah.
How did things proceed with Matthew over the course of that semester?
things went well, at least at first, right? We were both pretty newly out. We were both figuring things out, right? And so it was, I'd think of it as kind of a baby relationship.
Right. So this was your first relationship, and is this the first guy you kissed?
Yeah. First guy I kissed, first guy I had sex with, first guy I was romantically intimate with.
Wow.
Yeah, and I talked about this a bit at the Q Christian Fellowship during the sexual ethics seminar.
Right.
When I met. He and I pretty early on realized, or at least I realized pretty early on, that I needed to do some more discernment work over what I was and was not okay with sexually, what I thought was going to be right for me in my own life. I just didn't have any experience really to draw back on. And kind of the ethical training that I did have was, well, pretty simple. It was marriage is for a man and a woman, and don't have sex until you're married. And that was it, full stop. It's as if that was the only sexual ethic that was needed.
And when I first came out, I sort of thought, well, I'll take that exact same sexual ethic and apply it to gay relationships. And, I said I'd never gone out to bars. So I had decided I wasn't going to go out to bars. And, sex would wait until marriage, and had all of these rules and regulations and boundaries that I had in my straight life that I was just going to apply directly into the gay life. And didn't work very well when I went off to graduate school. I think I didn't appreciate that bars were really the place at that time that you met other people. And there is...
Absolutely.
What was your thinking at the time with regards to your sexual ethics? Was it something where you had set boundaries? Was it something where you had a values-based approach? Or what were you... Or were you just sort of struggling with everything and said, oh, now I have to worry about it because there's actually a boy that I like?
Yeah, something like that last one. It was in some ways kind of a scary struggling, but in other ways an exciting struggling, right? I'm a thinker, I'm a nerd, and so I like to think critically and to reflect on these sorts of things. And I appreciated the opportunity to think afresh about these sorts of things, about what it was that I was going to do and not do with my life. Similar to you, right? I wanted to live into the traditional ethic, the ethic that I had been given as much as I could, at least at first, because that felt comfortable to me. That's what I knew.
Right.
And, I'd seen it work for plenty of people before me, or at least it seemed to work for plenty of people before me. And so I figured it should work for me too. And so I liked that idea.
So you're saying that had worked for other gay people that you knew?
Oh, no, I just mean people in general.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point, how old am I? I'm 22, 23. I don't know a whole lot of gay people at that point.
Right. And that's always something I think is difficult is, you grow up in a different minority community, and obviously you have your parents as role models, your aunts and uncles, extended family. You have all these people who are role models. When as gay, you're just sort of plopped in the middle of a family and you don't have role models. And for me, that was a big challenge.
Yeah.
Was just trying to figure out, how I was gonna live my life.
Yeah, no, I absolutely get that. Well, and related to this, I see our questioning, our struggles as LGBTQ people deciding how it is that we're going to live our lives sexually and otherwise. I see all of that as a gift to straight people, frankly, as a gift to people in the church, or even who are just kind of affected by the general religious culture of like, well, all you need to know about sex is like, don't have it until you're married. And it's, only between one man and one woman, right?
Right.
We talked about this in the session at QCF, at Queer Christian Fellowship, but that's not an acceptable sexual ethic. That's not a sufficient sexual ethic for anyone, straight or gay or otherwise, right? Because, if you've got marital rape happening, or if you've got coercion happening, or if you've got two people or one person who isn't really focused on giving pleasure and is really only focused on getting pleasure, all of that's unethical sex. And all of that can happen within the context of marriage, right? And does happen within the context of marriage.
Unfortunately.
One of the gifts I think that we provide to the straight world as queer people is, okay, those basic tenets that you think are sufficient, they aren't. And we're going to show that through our own lives, just by the way we're living, right? And that's going to occasion for all of us, that can occasion for all of us, renewed thinking, fresh reflection on what is actually life-giving for us, what is actually right for me, for you, for each of us.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's an incredible thought on the subject, and I so appreciated the workshop that you did there.
Oh, thank you.
It's sort of scary in a way, because once you start to ask yourself these questions, you really don't know what your final destination is. Mm-hmm. You don't know, as you try and work something out, when you've got it right. Or maybe you do, and I'm just haven't quite gotten there yet. Was there ever times when you were just really afraid at the path you were going down and you missed that certainty that you had before?
Oh, that's such a good question. There was certainly a little bit of that. I certainly get what you're saying. I mentioned that my parents, when I was 13 and they discovered me discovering pornography, right? The message that they instilled in me at the very beginning and regularly thereafter was that they loved me no matter what.
Okay.
Whatever it is that I was doing or hadn't done, whatever it was that I would be doing down the road, like they loved me. That love was unconditional. I came to understand not just my parents' love for me in that way, but God's love for me in that way. And I think that when we truly embrace God's love for us as unconditional, as we struggle, as we make mistakes, we feel a bit of safety, at least a little bit of assurance that it's going to be okay. Even if I do something that hurts myself a bit or do something that hurts others a bit, I may need to make amends. I may need to change my course. But at the end of the day, God still loves me.
Right. And you can still be a good person. I think a lot of the problems that I had faced in my life was where I've set boundaries. And then if you cross that boundary, then, suddenly you're a failure. You're a terrible person. You're going to go to hell. You are unredeemable. Clearly what you're saying is that that's not the case with God's grace and God's love for us.
Yeah, no, and I think it's shocking to me how easy it is for those of us who grew up in conservative Christian communities that are supposed to be preaching God's unconditional grace, that are supposed to be preaching we're saved by grace, by God's perfect grace and not by works. And yet at these churches, that's where we learned to hate ourselves and to think that, if we make this mistake or if we sin in this way, then that's it and we're done. It's in those kinds of communities that we learn what shame is and that we feel it so acutely.
Right. Wow. So at what point in seminary did you decide that you wanted to be a preacher?
Well, kind of like with coming out, there's a lot of moments along the way, right? So I'm not sure there was a single moment that definitively decided it for me.
Didn't have like an aha moment where, God, you heard the voice, spirit over your head, the dove flew over and said, be a preacher.
Yeah, nothing quite like that. Or at least there were a lot of little moments along the way, I'd say. Now, there is one moment that I hold on to most, that I think sticks out to me most now a handful of years later. I remember talking with our chaplain at Princeton Seminary. Her name's Jan Ammon, and she's Reverend Jan Ammon, and she's one of the more amazing people I've ever met. I remember talking with her, sharing about vocational questions, sharing about maybe I'll be a pastor, maybe not, I don't know. And I remember her sharing in a pretty, unremarkable way. She wasn't trying to make this sort of like big glamorous point sort of thing. She just kind of commented, I'm really looking forward to the day when there are more LGBTQ people who work as pastors. And she emphasized when she said that, not because of all the work that they're going to do, not necessarily, not because of all of the things they're going to accomplish, but simply by being a pastor and by identifying as LGBTQ at the same time. Like that just being is ministry. So not to sound too preachy, right? But I think of Scripture talking about the dividing wall of hostility that Christ breaks down. And I think of the dividing wall of hostility that exists in many places. It's a really high and big wall, right? Between LGBTQ plus people and the church, Christian faith. Just being a queer person, being an LGBTQ plus person who is also a minister, that in and of itself helps break down that wall, regardless of what I do, regardless of what works I accomplish, what projects I complete. No, just being me, being William, who is gay and who is a pastor. That is ministry. That is the gospel. That's good news. And so Jan said all this to me, right, she didn't say quite all that, but just in a more subtle, more kind of a conversational way, drove all that home for me.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about your almost 2 years as a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What were some of the highlights and lowlights of your time?
There are some highlights that are kind of pretty consistent, right? I mean, I love the work of writing and giving sermons each week. That's a highlight of my job, just generally speaking.
How long are your sermons?
10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're definitely shorter than the ones I grew up with, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I think our pastor would always speak for at least 30 minutes.
Okay.
My mother was joking with me recently that every time he starts to say, oh, okay, and one more point, and she's like, you've been preaching for 30 minutes. We have it by now.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely of the kind of less is more strategy, right? Better to pour more time and energy into fewer words than just kind of, go on and on sort of thing.
Right. These sermons are what you've published in your book, Free, Clean, and Loved.
Yeah. I think there's 16 or so sermons in there from the past year and a half. So I love that part of my job. I love getting to preach to a community each week. And here's one of my highlights and one of my lowlights. Speaking of sermons, right? Preaching after Donald Trump's election.
Wow.
That November sermon, right? My congregation is not unanimously progressive, although some people might think that, given that they've brought a gay pastor into their church. But now I've got people on both sides of the political aisle in my church, and so I needed to find a way, both in that sermon and really in every sermon since then, to, on one hand, right, do justice to what I think the gospel calls us to, a gospel that does have political implications, maybe not partisan implications, but that does have political implications of peace, of justice, of mercy, of care for the poor, and so on. How do I preach that and be true to that, the prophetic truth of the gospel, while also not shaming my congregants, right? While also being a good pastor to those who have different convictions, political, theological, and otherwise, than I do. And that, to me, is both a highlight and a lowlight, frankly, of my work. I mean, it's not a challenge that I enjoy every day, but it's a challenge that, at least at the end of the day, if I've had a good day, at the end of the day, I'm grateful for it.
Right. Have you gotten any feedback from members of the congregation of, well, you're not going far enough, or someone else saying, why are you always criticizing Trump or American policy or this or that? Yeah,
I've been pretty much unscathed. I've got one or two comments here or there from both sides, right? People saying, I wish you'd say a bit more. Some people say, I wish you'd say a bit less. But frankly, I've been kind of surprised by how few comments I've gotten. That could very well be because I'm not doing it well enough, right? That could be a bad sign instead of a good sign. But I think really hard and spend a lot of time crafting these sermons, choosing what words I use. Yeah, I'm doing my best to minister to all of us. And it seems like that's working out pretty well so far.
Wow. Such an incredible story, William. I appreciate your being here with me today. And I want to ask you the question I'd like to end the interviews with. Mm-hmm. And it's very much along this topic of breaking down the walls, and the walls that separate the church at large and the gay community are very tall. Mm-hmm. What do you think that us as gay Christians, what can we do to help bridge the divide between the LGBTQIA plus communities and communities of faith who aren't affirming?
It's such a good question, and it's such an important question. And I think it's worth coming back to regularly for all of us. I mean, on one hand, this is kind of our life's vocation, right?
Right.
Now, having said that, I also want to go back to what I said earlier about just being who we are, being gay or being LGBTQ, and being a person of faith, being a church member, being a spiritual seeker, and doing both of those things authentically. That is part of the bridge building work. That is maybe at the end of the day, the most powerful bridge building work that we do, right? Sometimes arguments work, sometimes going out there full force with our words as persuasive tools and with our lives ready to make change, to change people's minds. That does happen, and that does do good work. At the same time, so does just being ourselves, right? And so does living authentically and inviting people who notice us, who are like, that's weird, or that doesn't seem right. People who observe how we're living and who pay attention to us. By just being who we are, we can do that bridge building work. And especially if someone who has felt, and I would imagine you felt this way too in the past, weighed down, burdened by this sense of responsibility. I have to build these bridges. I have to help people realize that you can be gay and Christian, or you can be whatever. Sometimes I feel like we just need to step away from that pressure on ourselves, recognize that at the end of the day, God will judge people's hearts. And at the end of the day, God's is going to break down that dividing wall of hostility, right? And we get to take part in it. We get to help with that. And that's wonderful. But we can also rest in just knowing that this is God's work, not ours. And at the end of the day, God just wants us to be ourselves. God just wants us to love ourselves well, and God just wants us to love others well as best we can.
Yeah. That's kind of funny because my husband was giving me that same advice earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying, okay, well, let's do this. Let's do this. He's like, can you just sit back for like 5 minutes and just let us sort of see how things settle?
Mm.
And I think a lot of us maybe who are very active doers is, well, I want a 5-step plan, William, of what I can go out and do in the next week.
Yeah.
I guess not sort of recognizing that a lot of it is just being who you are, living your life the best that you can, and just letting other people see that example in you.
Yeah. No, for Patheos, for the Unfundamentalist Christians blog, I wrote a piece a while back called 4 Reasons Why I Gave Up the Bible Debates.
Wow.
And in that piece, I speak to all of this. I need to just, I've done it. I've done the whole, like doing my homework and being ready to present it to whoever, whenever, however they ask me, whether they're charitable or uncharitable. I'm ready to spread this good news, right?
Right.
And more recently, over the last couple of years, I don't do that quite so much. There's still people regularly who reach out to me. And I'm much more inclined these days to say, well, here's a book that I found really helpful, or here are a handful of resources that were helpful to me. And then I just let it be. I don't feel quite as much pressure to persuade people, to convince them. If people think differently than I do, that doesn't affect me as much. Frankly, I don't care so much whether you think I'm going to hell or whether you think I shouldn't be a pastor, because guess what? I am, right?
Yeah.
Between me and God, we're good, right? And I've got a community of faith.
Right.
There's several communities of faith. Between me and them,
Right.
we're good.
Right.
So I feel much less defensiveness, much less pressure to respond, to give an answer when people demand an answer of me for who I am.
Wow. Yeah, and that's your very first point in your 4 Reasons Why I Gave Up the Bible, is that they can drain your soul.
Mm.
And I love you quote one of your seminary professors who says, I'm not going to talk with you about why women can speak in church, because talking about that actually reduces who God made me to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Reverend Dr. Yolanda Pierce.
Okay, well, thank you so much, William, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
And to share your amazing wisdom. If folks want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, how should they go about doing that?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. You can find me there always. I'm on Twitter too. My handle's WM Stell. Yeah, and so people are welcome to reach out however, whenever.
Great. All right. Thanks, William.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bridge. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love a positive rating and review on iTunes. I appreciate your support and feedback. For more details, visit brianpaytonjoyner.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter. The links are in the show notes. Have a great week. And as my grandpa used to say, if you live life by your own rules, you're gonna be okay.